Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to session 3 of Unify System Admin training. So I'll just skip through to what we're covering for session 3. So we've looked at project governance and user management and the governance matrix. We've looked at categories and workflows. And today we're looking at, well, this is templates. It's actually document templates. But document templates are integrated across every module in Unify. So a lot of the stuff that we've looked at and configured over the last couple of sessions actually all feed into what you can do with documents. So documents in Unify can do a number of things. So they can be the repository of information. So that can be information that's coming externally, and that information can be something that you record in the field. It can be, you know, a checklist, or they can be a place that you hold external documents and files that get sent to you. Additionally, they can be part of a workflow. So your workflow proceeds through Unify and ends up with a document that gets an approval. So an example of that is a payment claim. So you set up a contract, you do your percentage completes against that contract, and you raise a payment claim or an invoice, as the case may be. And then that goes into a document which gets signed off, and then you have your final result of that workflow that can be sent externally. They can also be used to aggregate data for reporting in Unify. So you can pull together a PCG report based on data that's across all the modules in Unify. And they do this very efficiently. So we're going to look at the mechanisms for doing that. If you've done our cost management training, we do a PCG report in that, which demonstrates how that works. So today's session is jumping under the hood of all of that and looking at what sort of controls there are and how you go about creating a template. So that's going to be our first topic today, which is the template controls. So what are all the things you can do in a template, and how does data get into a template? Then we're going to look a bit at the rich text editor, which is a way to either provide people a bit of a word processor within Unify or to auto-populate text. And that auto-populating text is done with template variables. And then we're going to go through creating some templates and testing them. So let's look at some template controls. So here we are in our deployment of Unify that we've been playing around in. And what we're going to play around in today is a configuration and templates, or the shorter version of getting to the same thing is methodology and templates. Takes you to the exact same thing. And as you can see here, these are all the templates that have been created within this deployment. Now, I'm just going to create one here by clicking on add. I'll just point out briefly, you see here it says add word. What that does is gives you a place to store templates that are not Unify templates that you would have in as Microsoft Word. So you may have some templates that you put together that need the flexibility of a desktop word processor, which Microsoft Word gives you. Unify has structured templates. Word obviously isn't. But you may want one place where all your templates live, so you can upload the latest version of a Word template in here and have this methodology templates section of Unify be the place where all your templates live. So that's what that's for. But we're not talking about that today. We're talking about Unify templates. So I'm just going to create a template that I'm just going to call test. I'll come back to this screen later on and talk about everything we can do here. But what I want to focus on right now are the different type of template controls. Now, the other name for these template controls is template input object. So you'll see here it refers to an input object. And we have a whole list of them here. There's quite a lot. So before we jump into those, I want to point out some materials on this that will be useful. On our website, unify.com.au, you scroll down to the bottom, there's a link here to community and training manuals. And there's a link here to the system administrator manual. Now, in that manual, there's an appendix that goes through and explains what each one of these controls does. So I'm just going to show you some examples of them. If you have questions about particular ones that you want to look at, then we can delve into those in some more detail. I'm more than happy to do that. So the first type of template control I want to look at is one that is just data capture. So I'm going to go here with the date selector. I'll just name the step here, date selector. So this date selector here allows the user who's creating this document to select a date, as it says. So it's an input type of template controls where you're asking the user to input some data. Another example of an input type is the custom list. So custom checklist. Now, you'll see here, there's a bunch of lists and list previews. So I've got this one here called IV demo, and it says present to site induction, visit witness points, hand in pass. So there's a list of things that you would do in this instance. So if I select this custom checklist, that's going to appear as a checklist in the document. So that gives a form for someone to fill in to, tick the boxes. And then we get some options here on the layout. So it can be a 2-column layout, 3, 4 columns, 1 column, or 1 column with comments. So the 1 column with comments, you get columns, the list down one side of the page, and then a further input for the comments down the other side of the page. Now, both these...
So Simon, where we are we in documents and create new?
That's correct. So no, we're in methodology templates, and we're creating a new template.
Okay, thanks.
So we're building a template, but what I'm doing here is just showing you some of the input objects. I'm not trying to build a particular template here. We're just looking at some examples of things. Now, both the custom checklist and the custom drop-down list, these are both fed from the configuration and custom list, which I'll just open in a new tab here. So in configuration custom lists, you can create the list you want. So if I go to custom checklists here, here's this IV demo one. If I edit that, and add a step to it, right? That will have now, just give that a title. Come back to here, and there we are, it's added review document to that because I added that to that list. So in the custom list, we can control what we have available here for checklists and drop-down lists. But essentially, so that's in each of these, it's a controlled data input. we're trying to, well, not trying to, we are giving the user some specific data to enter. So one of them was a date. In this case, it's entering data against a checklist. And then the other one that's similar to that is a drop-down list, to give them something to select within a drop-down list. There are some other controlled data ones, such as a distribution list. And what the distribution list does is it gives you a table here that populates from the project team. So if I go into resources and choose the McClive Enterprises Worldwide Headquarters, here's the project team. So everyone who's assigned to this project in a role. We talked about roles in the first session. If I was to use this document on that project, I would get all of that information listed as a distribution list. So Unify is populating data automatically here, but I can check the distribution list to say, who I do and don't want on the distribution list. So this one's, a lot of these are combinations of Unify auto-populating data and then you inputting data. So the date selector is just a pure input. But this checklist and distribution list are these combinations of Unify providing some data, either to give you a controlled data input or a table of information, and then you select what you want from it. Within the template, with one like this, where we get a table like this, we can then, choose what information we show and don't show within this. So, we don't want to show phone numbers or classification. So classifications are rate classifications. If you're not using those, you would, take that off. There's position and role. Sometimes we just show role and not position. And then you can rename any of these should you want to, and that will use that within the template. So, I could call this project role rather than role, and that's what would show up in this template. So if you have different terminology for things, that can be put in. Another example of an input is a text box. And if I scroll down here, we have 3 different types of text box here. So the first one is just a single line. And this one's nice because you can have a default value for it. So again, this is great for straight data capture. You need someone to enter in something that is simple and straightforward. You might have a template that is, a site inspection form, and you want them to, enter in the, rainfall recorded on site that day. So you might have a default value here of 0 millimeters of rain, and they come in and would overwrite that with, it was really wet today and there was 8 millimeters of rain. So another example that's heavily used is, and there's them, sorry, I'm getting back to text boxes. There's also multi-line text box, and there's the rich text one, which we're going to talk about in a moment. So another common one of, the user providing data just into the system is the file upload. Now there's 2 file uploads. The first one is a single file upload that allows you to have a file attached to the template. So that's got some very specific uses. You may have a particular template that you're wanting to distribute to people for them to use, and then they update it and put it in there. The one that's more commonly used is the file upload multi. And this has got a whole lot of settings. This is used in typically when I'm designing Unify templates, on almost every template, I'll have a step that says attachments. Sometimes you don't need it, but it's always there as an option, or almost always. And this is what we use for the attachments, this file upload multi. This is really nice because there's a whole lot of options with this and a whole lot of controls that also link in to version control. So you can upload, and if you've done a document management training, you would have seen this. You know, you upload an item, in the next version of the document, you can delete that one and upload something else to replace it. And you get a whole record within Unify of what's happened with your attached files and documents. If the file name of the document is the same, so if you had, you know, I don't know, concept design report, and the concept design report got reissued to you and you upload it into the document, Unify would replace the previous one with the current one. So you can have, you know, these all tied into the versions within Unify. The other thing that this does, you'll see there's an option here for thumbnails. So if you're attaching photos, Unify will generate a thumbnail. So you can actually use this step to create a document that is basically thumbnails. So again, if you did a site inspection or a defects inspection, or something that required you to take a bunch of photos, could even be doing an assessment for a progress recommendation or progress claim, you can have the images appear as part of the document and set the the size of the thumbnail. Now, this sizing of things is going to keep coming up. We'll keep talking about this. That's at 325, which is slightly larger than half an A4 page. So it's going to take up about half the A4 page. The A4 page is about 640 to 650 pixels wide, depending on your margins. And then we've got some other options, to turn on and off here. Do you show or hide the file description as part of the document? You can include or exclude the attachments from the PDF that you generate. And you can show or hide versioning as part of this. I've talked about how the versioning's worked. We typically leave that as showing, but you might have a reason to not do it. So that's file uploads. So the next type of input that I want to talk about are ones that generate data. And the simplest example of that is the document numbering step. So we've got, it's called auto number, and this can be used to generate an automatic document number. So for example, if you are issuing RFIs, this will generate, this is RFI 1, and you generate the next one and it will be RFI 2. We have some clients who every letter they produce, every contractual letter they produce out of the system has to be numbered with a unique number, and they use this and it generates the next number in the letter sequence. So
will be the same process for contracts if we want to upload our standard contract template?
You can use this. Yes, contracts do have their own auto-generated number in the background in the system that can actually be populated into documents. So that can go out as a purchase order number or a contract number that just auto-populates into documents. Or you can use an auto-generated number. It depends on the process. So we've done both with clients in the past, depending on, exactly what they're doing and what the process is. So this has been set up to support a whole range of scenarios. The simplest one is the first one, sequential number for each document created from this template per project. So if this was my project manager's instruction template, when I create the first one on any given project, it will be project manager instruction number 1. The second one will be project manager instruction number 2, and so on. If I go to another project and start again, it will go back to being number 1 for that project. The second option here is a unique document number which persists between versions of a document. So in this one, it's not sequential necessarily. Well, it will be sequential within Unified, but it's not going to be a simple 1, 2, 3, 4. But it's going to be a unique number that sticks with that document forever. So that's used when you just need a unique number, a unique identifier. And it doesn't really matter what it is. The third option is a unique identifier that changes as you do versions of the document. So you edit the document, it changes from document number 1024 to 1028, for example, just making up numbers here. And then the fourth option, and this was used in that example I gave of contractual letter numbers, a sequential number for each document created from templates using a named sequence. And so say, for example, you wanted your project manager instructions to be issued sequentially across all of your projects. So when I start a project, I don't start at PMI number 1, I might start at PMI number 347 because there've been 346 PMIs issued so far on all the other projects. And when every time I issue an instruction, I just get the next number. So it's instructions issued by our organization rather than instructions issued by project. So I would give this sequence a name. We can actually use these sequences with the same name across templates if you need to. And so a better example was this contractual letter. So we gave this a sequence number of contract letter, and there were about 20 templates of different contractual letters for this client. And with each one of those, we choose this option and do contract letter. And that way, when they generate the next letter, it gets the next letter number as the auto-generated number. So there we are. That's Unified generating that data, and there's lots of options for, suiting lots of auto number situations. Another auto-generated thing, which I quite like, is the document version history. So this, if you issue reports and at the front of it, you have a little history of, who created the document, who edited the document, that is this auto-generated in Unify. So as you edit a document in Unify, Unify creates new versions of that document. It knows who has edited the document, when, and what version it is. So that's just all shown automatically on this table. So if you need that as part of your quality assurance process, Unify auto-populates this. So the next type of control I want to show you is one that's more complex, but goes to the heart of the way that documents in Unify integrate. So this is, and there are lots of these, this is a control that basically reaches into the data in Unify and pulls that data into your document. Now, sometimes this combines that with you capturing data as well. Sometimes that, it's just a little bit of data. Sometimes it's quite a lot. So let's look at one example here. Let's go with budget. So what this will do is it will reach in and pull budget data from either the cost or the revenue module and populate this into your document. So it's fantastic for doing budget change requests and budget approvals, and for doing reports to show, what is the project budget or how has the project budget changed. We can do all of that using this control, but it relies on there being budget data there in the first place. So the document is not generating the data. The document is just getting that data from Unify, from your project, and pulling that into the document. Now, there's quite a few options around this one. So the template mode can be either project or portfolio. So portfolio means it pulls in across all the projects in Unify. Now, in doing that, we can filter it for sectors and project types. So all this metadata we talked about in the last session, that's all filterable in portfolio mode. This is great for if you are using Unify as to deliver a single project or program of works. You may want to pull all of this in one hit. If you're using Unify to deliver individual projects, you probably leave this as in project mode, but you've got that option. The next thing to set the default of is the chart of accounts you're using here. And we've got both revenue and cost chart of accounts available within this. If you did our cost management training, you will have seen us use a template where we use the post-contract chart of accounts to validate and to show changes. Actually, we did a document called budget status, I think, that looked at what was the current budget and how that budget changed over time. Within this, we can then, so with that selected, you'll see here is the post-contract chart of accounts. So I can actually run this for just one particular code, should I need to, or, one header code. So we've got 3 levels here. So I could just show it to show the, this would just show the construction budget. I may want to produce a document that just talks about the construction budget, doesn't talk about the consultants and the client costs and anything else. So I've got that option. If I have it set to project, it's going to be the whole thing. I can also choose what level we show information at here. Now, it may be that, level 3 is way too detailed for the audience for this document, and you would show them at level 2, which shows a summarized codes. Level 1 is just the project itself, so it'll be 1 line. Then, we've got this option of full budget or, sub budget. So sub budget allows you to select a portion of the budget. And then do you want to show any rounding of this? So, we want to round the budget to thousands or whole numbers so we don't see decimal places, or even to millions. So you've got that option there as well. And then this will present this in a table, in your template. And then the person actually creating the document from this has got even more options within that. So that's populating a budget. There's similar ones. So this one, cash flow, allows you to bring cash flow data in. And so does, if you're doing benchmarking, there's benchmark elements within this. Another example of bringing data in is the graph selector. So we've got a whole bunch of different graphs that you can do that will produce these graphs based on, what's happening, within Unify. And if I do this, for example, budget by version and add that in, oh, here we go. This gives me the control for this graph. And, we can, control how much of the page does go across. Let's say it's 50% of the page with comments on the right. Again, we're going to use the post-contract chart of accounts. What depth do we go to? It's level 2 and so on. So there's a bunch of, filtering and things. And then this is budget by version. And when you actually have this in a document, as per the sample, you can choose which budget versions you show in this. So it helps you show how you've reallocated a budget, for example. But anyway, there's a whole bunch of different graphs here to represent things graphically, which is another example of Unify populating the data into your document. There's another type, which is one that links data. There's a couple of these that I use all the time in building templates in Unify. The first one is the issue selector. And what that does, this is really useful. What that does is allow you to link the document you're creating to an issue that you have logged in the issues register on your project, in the issues module. So we talked last week about setting up issue metadata and workflows using issues. This is then the the other half of that, which is something may be an issue. So for instance, there's a problem, a question around the design, everyone's collaborating around the issue to resolve what's going to happen. And then you want to issue an instruction out. So I use this example of the project manager's instruction. When you generate that project manager instruction document, you want to know what issue that it relates back to. So you have this issue selector here that allows you to select that particular issue. And then when you're in the document or when you're in the issue, you can see the link to each of them. So you know what's happened. When you go and look at the issue, you can see, oh, here are all the documents that we generated as a result of this. And vice versa. When you're in the document, you can go, what issue did this relate to? Oh, there it is, into the issue, see all the discussion. Oh, that's why we created this document and sent out this instruction. And that can go for, variations and progress claims and all sorts of things that are part of the, daily churn on projects. One of the nice things about this is you can tie it into the process you're doing by pre-selecting the issue category. So for instance, this one might be set to RFIs because you'll issue instructions in response to RFIs. So 90% of the time, the category you want is RFI. So it's there already selected, and the issues that are available will, will already be the ones that are categorized as RFIs. There's an option in here in the template to include actions or not, and that's about the information that gets displayed. So if you tick this, it will show this table of actions relating to that, which might be an important thing to, have as part of the communication. It might be, yes, we want you to do these things, look at the actions, get them done by then. So you don't have to retype that into the document itself. But if you're just using it to link stuff, you wouldn't do that. So that's the issue selector. Another example is the contract details. So this one, as it says, will allow the selection of a contract in order to register that contract scope in the document, which will be important. Generally, this step here, if I have it in there, so the way we use this is if we have a document that relates to or can relate to a contract that you have, but it's not a progress claim, an invoice, an EOT, or a variation, or the contract document or purchase order itself, which all have their own controls that we'll talk about. So this might be a contractual letter or a contractual instruction, something of that nature. We want to be able to link this document to the contract it relates to. You may have 5, 6, 40, 100 contracts in Unify, and you want to know exactly what documents you've issued for each of those contracts. So this allows you to do that. Almost always, in fact, I can't think of an example where we haven't. This is a hidden step. That means it's a step that's in the process of the document, but we check this hide output box so it doesn't actually appear in the document itself, because we don't need this selection shown in the document. We just need the link that it creates. And this means that when you generate a document with this link, when you go into a contract, and if I go into this one here and drill in here to this contract, I can go to the registers view and I get this related documents register. So here we are, consulting contract. So this one actually had a contract issued, but if I was to generate this document, select that contract, it would appear in the register for this contract. So there are the other contract inputs. So contract variations that link to the variation control in the contract, contract deliverables that link to the deliverable control, contract EOT that links to the EOT, invoicing, which is on a revenue contract when you're generating your invoice, progress claim, which does the same thing, but when it's costs. So that's all, and each of those are actually, they're doing typically three things. They're linking to something, so linking to the contract. They are in populating data. So, you're seeing the, if it's progress claim, there's the certificate section that you're generating, all the claim details, and doing some data input. So for instance, if you're doing a progress claim, you've got to put in, the invoice number and the, certification date. There's some little inputs that are in that. So that's, I mean, there's a whole heap more, and I can talk about particular ones. If you have a question about a particular one, you've been playing around with it, and you want to know more, we can look at it. But they're all doing, one of those things that I mentioned, either providing data input, pulling data into the document from your project in Unify, or linking information between the document and other modules in Unify and other data in Unify, or they're doing a combination of all of them or some of them. So loads of different ones. What I want to move on to now, unless you have some questions about particular template controls that you want to look at.
Hi, Simon.
Yes.
Yeah, we did with the risk register.
Yeah, sure.
We emailed you like yesterday. Not sure if you have already.
Yeah, that was to do with reports systems, as opposed to this, which is, I mean, the risk register. Let's talk about it briefly. So with this register here, this is about populating that into a document. So for instance, if you're producing a report and you wanted the risks included in the report, there's actually three different options depending on what you want displayed. So there's risk details that show it in a particular way, the risk register, which gives you all the fields and you choose which field you want shown. That does include risk custom fields. And the other one was the risk summary, which again is a different layout of things, sort of with a table of current and treated. So there's a bunch of ones. These all fall into the category of populating data. So they're populating the data from the risks module through into a document. So let's move on to the rich text box. So the rich text box in Unify, it is Unify's word processor. So when you're building a template, which we're going to do, you'll reach points where you will have all the standard controls to, input some data and link data and auto-populate data, but then you want the text that is unique to your template, which is what this is for. But some of that text you may need to auto-populate. So the rich text box allows you to do a bunch of things. Is to, populate this text, apply your standard styles to this text. So when it renders to PDF, it comes out the way you want. And then also to use template variables to auto-populate information. So let's start with the basics. I just put some text in, I start typing, and I want that to be a heading, this to be a subheading, and there we are. Well, first of all, I can use a spell checker here to fix my terrible spelling. My terrible typing, nothing wrong with my spelling. It's the typing that falls short. So I've put my text in here. And I can now apply styles to this. So you'll notice up here, we have this thing here, which is styles, right? You'll also notice that this applies up here, right? Within the step title. So these step titles can be part of the document using a heading style, or if you don't want them to be part of the document, you set them as none. So you might just have the step title to inform the user on what the step is for, but you don't want that to be part of the document. So in that's the case, you do none. And then you can have these styles apply to this text. Now, the other text ones, multi-line and single line, don't get these styles. Only the rich text does. So I can say that's heading 1, that's heading 2, that's just regular text, and then this, I click on that and that becomes dot points. Fairly straightforward. The way this works in the background is using HTML. So we're in a web environment, it's in HTML, and if you really love HTML, you can click on this button here and see how this is being coded in HTML. And if you really love HTML, you can go in here and put the coding in. Exciting times. But the way it works is when we set up your Unify deployment, we get you to give us an example of your organization style sheet. And we apply that within the system such that when this document outputs to a PDF and goes to someone externally, heading 1 is whatever heading 1 is in your style sheet. So, if that is in a particular font and a particular color, here as you're typing in Unify, it will look like this with, in black, but it may be that that goes out in, a, bright pink in Comic Sans, if that's what, floats your boat. So it will look like a document that you've produced using your style guide. That's how this is designed to work. And what you want to do when you set up the templates in Unify is to apply these styles in the right places such that when users are creating these templates, they don't even have to think about this stuff. They just type in the text where they want it typed in and everything is set up in the right way. Now, when doing that, I'm often given Word documents to convert into documents in Unify. So someone might say, oh, here's the sort of letter we produce. We want to produce this letter out of Unify. auto-populating all the information from the project into it, and that's fine. So when doing that, you can copy and paste the, the stuff that's going to go into this rich text box from the other document, but you have to do that carefully. What we recommend is that when you do that, you use this thing here, which is the paste as plain text. So what that does is that strips out any coding that would come from Microsoft Word, such that it doesn't stuff up the HTML coding in Unify. Now, Microsoft Word, the coding in the background there is XML, which is not compatible with HTML. And if you do in a document in Unify or in a template in Unify, paste in stuff directly from Word, what tends to happen is it will look okay on the screen because most browsers can handle, they can parse the XML to a certain extent. It won't look perfect, as in it won't have the perfect styles applied. But when you go to save it as the PDF doesn't have the same flexibility that the browsers have, and it's looking at for very specific rules based on very specific HTML coding to convert this text into your style guide. And if it hits something that it can't convert, the PDF fails, and you get a document that you can't export out of Unify or email out of Unify to a PDF. So when creating templates and editing documents in Unify, if you are bringing in standard text or example text from a Word document, use this paste as plain text. And then when you do that, you just click on that and, paste it in Control V. So if I give you an example here. So here is Unify's resource planning manual. And if I select all of this here, copy, here's paste as plain text is selected, Control V, you see that's all just come in as text. And now I apply the style guide to it. So I want that one to be, heading 1, this one to be heading 3. That's actually come through all on one line. So I'll change that back to paragraph and so on. I work my way through it, giving it the styles I want. So paste it in as plain text, then apply the styles that you want within the template in Unify. So the other thing in terms of formatting here that's different from Microsoft Word is we don't have a toolbar across here, and we can't create spacings of things using tabs. To create those spacings in this HTML environment, what we use are tables. So we also apply styles to tables. So let's talk about tables for a little bit. When we bring this up here to insert a table, we get a whole bunch of options. So we get the number of columns that we want and the number of rows. So that's, fine. If I want one that has, 4 rows and 3 columns, I just set that to 4 and 3. Here we've got something called cell padding. What that does is just put a few pixels, in this case 3, between the edge of the cell and where the text appears. That tends to make the text easier to read. So we have this default setting here of the cell padding of 3. You can increase it or decrease it. We recommend not decreasing it below 3. We find that 3 gives you a good result. Cell spacing, on the other hand, puts a gap between the cells. So if you want to, have a gap between the cells, that can give you a certain style of table. If that's what you're looking for, you can use that. The alignment here, this isn't about aligning the table on the page. So it's about aligning the table within the text. So if you set this to be center, left, or right, what it will do is align the table within the text and include the table within the flow of the text. If you say not set, the table will be separate to the text that's above or below it, which tends to be what people want, because you want that table to be, you know, going right across the page to create the formatting that you want. However, if you want a table that's smaller than the whole A4 page and to have the text going around it, then you would use that alignment. So you would say, you know, it's left aligned or right aligned. Center, I imagine, would look quite strange with text going either side of the table, but you can use it. In most cases, when I'm setting up templates, the tables that people have in the example documents go all the way across the page. So I have this alignment set to not set. Then we've got the width here, which is in pixels. I mentioned that the A4 page is typically 640 to 650 pixels wide, depending on the size of your margins. Obviously, if you have massive margins that take up more pixels, that gets smaller. So we have this default width here of 645, which means it will typically be an A4 page. Only change that default width if you don't want it to be a full A4 page. So if you want it to be half the A4 page, then you would set it to be, you know, 320 or 325. But in most cases, you'll leave that set as the default. The other default setting we have here is the class. And there's two that we can use here. So table class applies the standard table formatting that you have in your style sheet. So if you have your standard table style is to have the header row bold and in purple, and then the rest of the text listed below that with lines across the page but not down the page, that table style will apply in the PDF document. So it will just apply that automatically, which is typically what people want. So that's what I'm going to do here. I will show you the not set one as well, but let's do this one first. So here's my table style. I've got 3 columns. Column 1. And you'll notice as I put things in here, the size of everything is changing. Column 3. So there are my 3 columns. And then here I've got, you know, the stuff that's in each column. And so on. So that's just laying out this information with how many columns and cells and rows I need. You can control the size of the columns. And we do that by clicking in the header row, and we right click and do click down to cell and do table cell properties. The other thing you do is click here, which is the same thing, table cell properties. So this gives us some more things to set. And the only thing we want to set here is the width, and we want to do it in pixels. So remembering our 645, if we want to guarantee that this is, you know, a particular size, and you might have a lot of tables within the document and you want all of them to match, well, then you set all the column widths to match and all the tables will be identical. So, for example, we may not want it to just have Unify automatically find the size of the table columns. You may want it to look to be a particular size. So I might set this one here as being 100 pixels wide, which will narrow that down considerably. And this next one here, I might set that to be 400 pixels wide. There we are. So it's very wide. And then the third column gets what's ever left. And, you know, you can play around with that to get the exact look that you want for particular tables. And then, you know, when you've got that set the way you want, if you want to know what you've done, I mean, you can go through here and look at the cell properties and check each one. You can come in here and look at the HTML. So here we are, you know, column 1 is 100 pixels and that one's 400 pixels. And so if I'm setting up another table to match it exactly, I just give them the same column widths in pixels and it will all match. Another type of table, we might want a table that we're just going to use to space out text on the page, but we don't want it to look like it's a table. We just want the text to be spaced out on the page. So to do that one, again, we insert a table and we do the class of not set. So we still want to use the 645 to have the whole A4 page. Everything else applies. We just don't want it to appear as a table. We want it just to appear as formatted text. So in this case, I'll insert that and you'll see here that that's blank. And I might just be using this to populate some information and to space that out nicely on the page. And again, I'll use my cell properties here to say, oh, let's make that 200 pixels wide. And then the information I want can be populated in here. So that's the other type of table. And of course, you know, we can use these controls to add and delete rows and columns and so on. You can even merge cells should you need to, you know, if you have something that requires, you know, 3 columns for a bit, then 2 columns for a bit, you can do that. So I've, you know, added that and deleted that. Bunch of things to do around this. I'm going to come back to auto-populating this information. But I just want to talk about a couple more things. This allows us to insert page breaks. That's all pretty straightforward. This allows us to insert an image. So I can browse for a particular image that I want to insert. Let's go with that one. Again, this alignment is aligned within the text. So not set will mean it's just going to appear in line, as it were. Now that I've inserted that image, you'll see that that's enormous. I can right click on it and click on insert/edit the image. And you'll see with this dimensions, if I put 645 in here into the first one, that will bring the image down to 645 pixels wide and resize it to fit within the A4 page. So depending on the size of the image that you're inserting, you obviously want it to fit on the A4 page in portrait mode. This is, of course, that allows you to do that. So that's inserting images. The other thing that I use, if you're setting up a lot of templates, now they may be, you know, very different templates for different purposes, but you may want to have some, a standard look to them. So for instance, you may have set out very carefully in one of the templates the way you want the header information to appear with a, you know, with a combination of a table with no style, so it's just setting out the text, and a table, you know, with a style to get exactly what you want. And this will be largely the same from one template to the next. What I do in that case is I keep a copy of the HTML code. So this is the only time generally, unless I'm doing some debugging, I go into this HTML view and I just select all of this and copy it. But what I'm actually going to do is copy it without the image in this case, and open up, you know, a text editor, simple text editor. So just the Notepad app. I find is the best one to use in Windows. And I've just got that there ready to go. And if I've got a bunch of these, I might, save this as, letter form 1, and there might be a slightly different one. And then if I'm just going to go to another step here. But this might be a whole new document. Select my rich text box here, and rather than having to go through that whole process of setting up that text and setting up those tables exactly the way I want, I can just paste in the HTML text in here. And there it is, exactly the same. Don't know why I'd actually want it like this, but that saves you having to, go through that fiddly process of creating the columns and the tables exactly how you want them. You may at this point then change the content within them to suit your particular document, but you'll have the formatting you need, because that's going to take the time, is setting up that formatting in the first place. So there's a few more things you can do in here. There's, numbered lists and, indenting and so on. This is a toolbar, basically just like you'd have in a word processor, sort of simplified version of one. One thing that is useful with this is the preview button. So what that does is shows you what that looks like, in HTML. The other preview, which is perhaps more useful, is this one here, preview as PDF. This does all that rendering to PDF, applying the style sheet to it. And in this case, the style sheet that's being applied is a Unify cover page. But, I can look at this and see, here we are. Here's how this is looking. Here's how the columns look on the page. Is that looking right? Yes, no. And, I can know that I'm using the right styles. Is that heading coming out in the lurid pink that I want? Yes or no? If it's no, maybe I should have been using heading 2 rather than heading 3 there to get the right one. So you can check that using that preview as PDF, which is very useful. It's also a great way to check that you've got all the columns lined up across multiple different tables. Okay. Now, the other thing we do within the rich text editor is set the template variables. So for instance, here, I've got in this table here, it says project, and I don't want to have to type in the project name here or the project ID. I want to have that, we have that data in Unify. I want to populate that automatically. And we do that through this little thing here, which says insert template variable. So I click on that, I get this here, and we get a whole range of template variables that can do all sorts of data from across the system. So the project data, that tends to align with your overall project data or metadata that is in typically the summary module of Unify. So projects, project custom fields. There are some other overall ones, like this one, project current fee, that's basically looking at data from some of the other modules aggregated at a project level. But I'm just going to go for project name here. And the client, so this one is going to be based on the role one. So I select the role of client, and I'm going to do client name and then a comma, and then back to role, back to client, client organization. So that's going to put the client, the person I'm dealing with, followed by their organization. And you can see how that can be used to, I mean, you can populate stuff, you know, in line with the text here. You know, I can put in the project baseline start date there in the text. I can put in a document one here. So this is document scope. And an example of document scope might be the document auto number. So we've set the document auto number up here in one of these, document number. So I can populate that. Now, one thing to remember with these template variables is you need the data in the document already. And what I mean by that is, say you want to have this document number appear as part of your text, it means the step for that document number needs to come before the step that has the text. And that goes for any of this stuff. So what you typically do, and we'll talk about this more in creating the templates, but you have all the things where you're doing the inputting and the linking first, and then you have the rich text box where you're populating the text. So that might not be the order that it appears in the output when it generates to PDF, but it needs to do that. So for instance, if we're doing anything that relates to contract scope here, so, you know, we can have the, let's say, you know, the contract principles, organization or name, the contract adjusted value, including variations, but including tax. You know, we can auto-populate any of this data here if we have already linked to the contract in some manner, either using that contract details step, or if you've had a, you know, contract variation, contract deliverables, contract or progress claim or so on, that will also link to the contract. So we can then populate a whole lot of contract specific data through, but the step linking to the contract needs to be before the rich text step. So there's loads of information here. And generally, if the data exists in Unify, there should be a template variable for it if someone has, you know, wanted to use it in a document before. Now, you may come up with something where there is data there that isn't in a template variable. And if you do come across that, let us know, because we will create that template variable. The template variables, for your information, live in configuration and in template variables. And as you'll see here, it's all SQL code. So you can actually come here and get a bit more information on, you know, what they are. And it even tells you a bit about, you know, because the SQL code is referring to the specific tables that, you know, are being looked up within this. So, you know, but basically what we do is we'll provide what the SQL query is, and then you do add, put in the SQL query we've provided and the template name, and you can add it with the appropriate scope to your Unify deployment. So, as I said, I don't know how to do these. I get the software developers to do these for me, and they provide it, and then I, you know, add it as a template variable. But it's very rare that we don't have template variables these days. It's they're mostly been done. You'll see some of them require this extra selection. So, you know, the role one, you select the role. Here in the project, you can select the project custom field. So if you've got project custom fields, which we talked about last time, you know, if you want to populate the FICA, you select that and click in that, and it will put in here against that the project FICA coming from the custom field for FICA. And then when the person creates the document, at the moment they get to this step in the document, Unify looks up that data and populates that as text into the rich text box. And then it's there. Now that only happens once. So when you do another version of the document, Unify doesn't repopulate the template variable because it's already been activated and just become text. It's just text at that point. However, the user can go and select a template variable and put it into the document themselves, because they have the text box here is exactly the same within the document. So that that can be done. And obviously now if I copy the HTML of this, it's got all the rich text, the template variables in it as well. So cool. Any questions about template variables and using those? Okay, so for the rest of the time that we've got, we're going to have a go at creating some templates. Now, feel free to have a go at creating a template in your deployment of Unify. And you can ask a question about that, and we can look at that. What I want to show you before we go on to that is just a couple more things. Where's my test template about creating templates? So here we are. So we looked at how you create a template. You hit add. To edit a template, you find your template down here and click on the edit template button. Now the templates have version control built into them as well. So you can get some information on the version control. So when editing or creating a template, obviously we can rename the template. Put in a template description. This template description, the users see this. So when they go to use a template, that's telling them what it's for. If I go back in here to the templates, you'll see some of these have got descriptions. So change request, use this to collate and submit a change request on the project. It's helping the users out on what the template's used for. Now, the templates can be tied back into our project metadata. So you may have particular templates that are only used in particular sectors and project types and service lines and so on. This allows you to have different methodologies. You may have different templates on your aged care sector than you have in your commercial sector projects, because you need to use different languages, you need to refer to different things. You know, there's particular jargon that goes with a particular sector that you want to have as part of your reports and your documents that you don't want to have elsewhere because it doesn't mean anything to them. So you can tailor the templates accordingly. You know, select according to the project metadata where they will be available. And what that means is when I'm in a particular project with that metadata selected and I go to documents and select new, I'm only going to get the documents here that are available to me based on that selection. So if I'm in an aged care project, I won't see documents that are designed for the commercial sector. This can be carried down further, you know, to locations. For instance, you may have on your progress claims particular wordings that relate to the Security of Payments Acts that are different from state to state. So you can set up a template with the wording for South Australia and select that to Adelaide, the wording for Queensland, select that to Brisbane, and so on. And that way, you know that when people are doing projects in those locations and they're issuing a progress claim, it's going to have the right wording that relates to the Security of Payments Act that it might need. And that goes for invoices as well, probably more commonly used on invoices. It can relate to the project phase. You know, we use different documents in the concept phase versus the construction phase. You can do that too. For contract administration, you'll see here we've got contract standards. So contract standards are set up under configuration and contracts. And then we have contract standards here. So this is a type of contract metadata. We tag what standard is being used. Again, you may have different templates that you use that have different wording for different contract standards. for example, some contracts call variations variations. So you would issue a document that says this is a variation under clause, 27 of the contract. Other contracts may refer to variations as contract sum adjustments. So you want to produce a document that uses the variation template control in Unify, but says contract sum adjustment rather than variation, because that's the wording that's required under that contract. So you just set up templates for each of those, select the contract standards that they apply to, and when you're in that contract, so again, we go into the contracts module, and I'll just pick anyone here. So, I mean, in this contract here, if I go to the details view, this one, it doesn't have a standard selected, but, if I select, it's a 4122 contract. When I'm in either the value or the invoice section and, I select new document, I will only get the documents that either relate to all contract standards or relate to the 4122 contract standard, if I have that selected in the template. So again, what we're allowing for here are multiple methodologies within Unify, which is something I've talked about in this configuration. So that's the contract standard. We also have here the template categories, right? These template categories, these are ways of filing information within Unify. Now, in Unify, it's always filed within a matrix, but the template categories are also set up under the templates, and they're below. So we've got all the document templates here, and then we've got the template categories. So the way to think about those is, if I'm setting these up for a client, I'll get them to provide me what their typical filing structure is. And that template category is the top level of that filing structure typically. So, these may be different in your organization. And then we tag the template to that template category. And then in the documents module, we can filter for that. So we have the category. If I go here and go contract admin, I'm only going to get the templates and the documents from those templates that relate to contract administration. Change it to financial management. Suddenly I'm getting different templates. Change it to PMO and I'm getting different templates again. So it's a way of categorizing documents or filing documents. In Unify, every document that's created inherits all the project information and project metadata, the template category, the template name, which is a further categorization of it, and then your document numbers and template names and so on. So you can select which of these applies. Then below the template category, we have some controls that allow you to define the PDF output. So the paper size, is it A4 or A3? Typically things are A4. Which PDF style sheet we use. So in this deployment, we have three. We've got the cover sheet, which is, looks like a report, the letterhead, which is a letterhead, and the no cover sheet, which is like a memo format. You may have more, or typically we do about two, at least, a cover sheet and no cover sheet, or cover sheet and letterhead. Sometimes people have a different invoice style sheet. So you can set the PDF style that applies to your document. So next to the PDF style, we have the PDF options. So this allows you to select whether you want to include any of these things within the template itself. So the signatures are the electronic signatures. Comments are any comments that are made on the document. So people can comment on documents, even if they're signed off. So I can go into this one here, this positional paper. This has been filled out and signed off, but I can add a comment to it. And that records that I've commented on this. So you can continue to collaborate on a document even when the document's completed. So you have the option to include or exclude that in the PDF of the document. So the transmittal is the email transmittal. So if I, this document hasn't been emailed, but if I did email it out, the email gets recorded as part of the document as the transmittal, and there's the option to include that in the PDF. And then the watermark is if you issue a draft document, you can go out with a draft watermark. So you have that option there as well. So you select those as appropriate. Typically, if a document is a document that is part of a workflow that gets signed off, such as, you know, a contract approval, a variation approval, I would include the signatures as part of the document. If it doesn't need that, then you leave it off. So it depends on what you want to show within that. Then we have the document edit and sign off roles. So the document edit roles, these restrict who can create and edit particular documents. So this is very restrictive, and I would only recommend using these in highly specific circumstance where, you know, you want to limit exactly who can even create a document. It may be that, you know, you have particular processes that must be done by a particular person in a particular role, so you select the role that applies to the template. But 99% of the time, selecting these can end up restricting some people from just getting into Unify and creating what's needed. So for instance, if you selected that this, you know, could only be created by the project director and the project manager, and you ask an assistant project manager or a junior project manager to jump in and create this report, they won't be able to even see that this template exists. They won't be able to create it because it's not linked to the role that they're on. So except in exceptional circumstances, I leave these blank. However, you know, there are particular cases where, because of business rules within organizations, only certain people can create certain documents. So that's when we apply them. Generally, almost always we leave them blank to give you flexibility. So then we have document sign-off roles. These are used much more commonly. So in Unify, when documents are completed, they need to be signed off. Once they're signed off, they can no longer be edited. That's it. They're a final record of that document forever. You know, so you have an audit trail for all of that. As administrators, you can delete a signed off document in some circumstances, and in some circumstances you can't. If it's connected to an external system, for instance, it's an invoice and you've linked it to your financial system and the invoice data has been passed through to the financial system, you can no longer delete that document in Unify, because to do so would bring the two systems out of sync. But if it's not that, an administrator can delete a document and then the user can start again. So if they go all the way through to sign off and realize they've stuffed it up, administrator can delete, user starts the whole process again. There's no unsigning off of documents. The default setting when nothing is selected is that the user who creates the document signs off the document. You can also specify who signs off the document based on their role. So it may be that this one needs to be signed off by the project director and the important project manager, just to pick those two. Now you see when I select these, we get these delegations, and this is saying budget delegation. You remember this document I put in that budget step. That means this can be used to approve a budget, and we can set the delegation amount that goes with this. So this works with anything that has anything to do with money. So if this was being set up to as a document to issue a purchase order or issue a contract. You could have delegations that related to the size of the contract. If it's a progress claim or an invoice, the delegations relate to how much money is going to be claimed or paid. Variations, the value of the total variations within the document, and so on. So in this case, it's the budget. And what we can do is set that, if it's, let's say we've got three here. We've got the project manager, the project director, and the important project manager. Let's say in all circumstances, it goes to the project manager. If it's greater than $5 million, I've got enough zeros there. Yep, it goes to the important project manager. And if it's greater than $8 million, it goes to the project director. So that will, so if it's the budget is less than $5 million, there's one person who signs this off. Above 5 million, there's two. Above 8 million, there's three. Now, we can do it that this person drops out of the picture when it hits this person's delegation level. So we only need two people to sign it off, but we want that second person to be up the tree, as it were, up the delegation tree. So in that case, we would say when the important project manager drops off when it's, less than, when it's greater than 5 million, but less than 8 million. And if it hits that 8 million, well, it goes to the project director and it's theirs to sign off. So there's quite a lot of flexibility within this. So you get people who sign it off in all circumstances, people who sign it off when it reach particular delegations, but then drop off when they hit other delegations and so on. The other thing you can do with this is there's this enable sign on behalf of, right? So that allows anyone who has editing rights to the document can sign off the document on behalf of the people who are listed as the sign-off roles. Now, you may have it that, for instance, all your contractual documents have to be signed off by the project manager, but you enable sign on behalf of, so anyone in the project team can sign it off on behalf of the project manager. You have complete transparency over that. Let's say Bobby was the project manager and Kyle, you signed it off on his behalf. It would say, signed off by Kyle on behalf of Bobby, project manager. So you would see that as part of the document. But with the delegations in play, it may be that that just isn't allowed in your organization because you don't have the authority to, sign things off over $5 million. So in that case, you would turn that off and that flexibility is removed and it has to go to the person in that role. And there's no flexibility with that. So this is about where you need flexibility, you select it, you still get transparency, but you get flexibility. Where you don't want it, you take it off. The other thing you can do is set this number of signatures required. So we have clients who use these delegations and obviously turn off the enable sign off on behalf of there, so people can't sign things off above their delegations. They also have a business rule that it must be 2 people minimum who sign off any document. And what that means is that, someone might be able to be in the role of the project manager and the important project manager because the project they're on isn't big enough to have both a project manager and an important project manager. But if a document comes through that only goes to them for sign off, it doesn't meet that minimum business rule. And so the document won't be signed off because it hasn't gone to enough people. So that's just an additional business rule that's in there. And the other one here is whether the delegation amounts include or exclude tax. So do we put GST on them or not, basically? If they need to include the tax, yes. If they don't, we untick that. So that's all the settings here. There's one other setting here I want to talk about that goes back to the first session that we had around the access matrix within Unify and the governance matrix. And this is how it applies to documents. So this template can be set to be visible to a license level. So if everyone can see this document and this template, it's team member, or you can restrict it to project manager and program manager and even administrator. The way I find this is used most commonly is that if your organization, if you're opening up Unify to external people and you're bringing them in as team members, but you don't want them to see your invoices that you generate, your budgets, and anything else with financial information you don't want them to see, you set those templates to program manager level. Most of your internal people will have program manager level or higher access, and those documents are restricted to the people with those license levels. So there's a lot of flexibility with this, but the idea is to prevent, for instance, someone on a team member license can't see the contracts module or the cost module or the revenue module, so they don't know your budgets looking at Unify. But if you're generating documents that have the budgets in them, they can see them unless you apply this setting to the template. So we might set that way. So once we've got all that set, we set in, here we are, here are all the steps in the document. Let's say I've just gone through them all, and we can insert and delete steps within this when we're editing it. And when we're done, we hit complete. Now, at the completion point, we can validate, again, our document sign-off roles. And we can do two other things. One, we can set the output of the document. Now, in this one here, I may want that these rich text box to be much higher up. I don't want them appearing last. I may want this one as the first step, and then, I'll make that 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. And then I want the second rich text box, so that'll be 8. And then wherever 8 was will become 9, 10, 11, 12. I've got something duplicate. I've got 2 7s, so I'll make one of the 7s 13. There we are. So the order that we input, which would follow a logical order of connecting to the data in Unify, creating data that we need, like for instance, a date selector or an auto number, and then having the steps that populate that data, such as the rich text steps, obviously not the order you want it to appear in the document, so you reorder it using the output here. The only tricky thing here is you have to have, the exact same number that you have on the left. And if you don't get it right and hit finish, Unify will tell you you've got it wrong and you've got to go through and renumber them. The other thing you can do here that's really useful is this document auto name. And look, here are our template variables again. Exactly the same template variables we had in the rich text box, but I can use these to create the business rules for the document name. So if there's document data that's here, I don't have to, type that all in again to create a document name. So, and you can have a mixture of, text and thing. And let's say this was a, one I often use here under the document one is the document. Where is it? Document selected issue title, right? So remember, we put a step in here that selected an issue. That issue will have in its title a description of what things were about, right? So let's say this was a project manager instruction. I can do project manager instruction, document auto number to bring in the document number, and then the selected issue title, which would explain the problem that the instruction relates to. But, you know, there's a whole bunch of things here. You can, if it's a contract document, you can bring in the contract name, the contract value, you know, all sorts of stuff. Anything that's in any of these can be used to set this up. So if you have business rules that relate to how you name documents, use the template variables to set those up in Unify, and you know, never have to name a document again, or at least actually naming the documents becomes much easier. And when that's done, we hit finish, and we've created that template. Thanks, everyone. Appreciate everyone's attendance and participation in these system administration trainings. I hope they've been useful for you. And see you in the next training.
Thank you.